Welcome to the Real News Network. Great to have you with us. I'm Mark Steiner. November 6th may prove to be one of the most pivotal elections in U.S. history. Many are focusing on Congress and the pitched battles for seats to determine who will have the majority in both the U.S. Senate and in the House of Representatives. Races for governor around the country could determine how congressional districts are defined until the year 2030. So we're in the midst of a crucial political election. The races down ballot are equally as important, if not more important, to some people. Around the country, races for state assemblies and district attorneys we've been covering are battlegrounds between progressives and conservatives, as well as between progressive and establishment Democrats. This can decide the future direction politically for our country, as well as power inside of local governments. The races for district attorney in communities as diverse as Ferguson, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Boston, places in California could transform the criminal justice system, build movements of the poor and disenfranchised, and put an end to policing that incarcerates too many brown and black people in our country. One such race is taking place in Boston, Massachusetts, or more specifically, Suffolk County, where progressive Rachael Rollins won the Democratic primary. In a moment, we're talking with Anoa Changa, host of The Way with Anoa, talking about this race that's taking place now in Boston. And Anoa, welcome back. Great to have you with us here on The Real News.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start in Boston, and we'll work our way down the coast to Georgia, where you are. But let's begin with this race in Boston, what this win meant for Rachael Rollins in this primary, who she's facing, and what's being set up here.
Yeah, so we've already been seeing like this really amazing wave of progressive DAs like really taking on long-term incumbents and fundamentally shifting the idea of what does it mean to have a prosecutor, particularly in some of these larger areas. We've seen most notably Larry Krasner, right, in Philly. We've seen this summer Wesley Bell take on Bob McCulloch, who infamously botched the Michael Brown murder trial, as well as has harassed St. Louis and Ferguson area protesters. We've seen Kim Foxx in Chicago. While that movement wasn't exactly like in electing Kim Foxx, the Buy Anita campaign definitely was pivotal in terms of having accountability built into that office. And so, what we're seeing now is, Rachael Rollins is running in Suffolk County, which includes Boston. She won in a pretty competitive field of Democrats in the primary. And now she's up against an independent who's definitely more conservative leaning, who's backed by the police. And she's having to really fight to explain why the reforms she's trying to bring to the system are necessary, particularly when you're looking at the rate of issues of, mass incarceration, not just across the country, but specifically in Suffolk County and in Boston, as well as, this is another area that has over-criminalization of basically poverty. We have a lot of crimes of poverty that are overly criminalized, that instead of helping people use wraparound supports and services. And these are some of the things that she's looking at doing through the office of the prosecutor, as well as not prosecuting for certain low-level offenses like minor drug possession, et cetera. And there are some people who are just like, you're crazy and you're going to create more crime. And we literally have seen the opposite, right? We know with the end cash bail movement that we have people who are in jail literally because they cannot afford to post bail and not be there. So when we're looking at, Wesley and Larry Krasner and these other folks who have won their elections, and now we're turning our attention to Boston, which is supposed to be this liberal Democratic bastion, the fact that we have such a strong woman candidate, particularly in this era of, women candidates, women of color, Black women being so successful at the ballot, it's fascinating to watch Rachael have this uphill climb now in a Democratic, liberal bastion against this independent that's backed by the police.
And I mean, very specifically, one of the things I was reading about Suffolk County and the area around Boston is that even though it's still a majority white area, that the numbers of Black and brown people incarcerated and arrested in those communities are even higher than what takes place around the rest of the country, which is pretty amazing.
Yes.
They often look at Boston as the most northern southern city, in many strange ways. But so how's this playing out?
From criminal justice to education to housing, it's a whole bunch of stuff, right? I mean, it's like down south but up north.
Right. You might be doing better in Atlanta than they do in Boston. So
we might be.
So what is it? So how's that playing out in this race, though? I mean, how is that setting up the contest in terms of how people are viewing Rachael Rollins and the critique she's getting, and how this sets up the debate, what you're actually seeing in that race?
Mm-hmm. I think where we see not that like, again, Larry Krasner is sort of like our go-to comparison for these types of DA candidates. Not that Krasner has not seen or experienced, like, you know, challenge or issues or whatever, but for the most part, he was pretty welcomed overall. With Rachael, I think there has been a lot of pushback. And there's a lot of fear being built into rhetoric around what she plans to do by local media, by her opponent, obviously, that she just wants to inflame and support criminals, that she's going to increase more crime. I mean, they're definitely trying to appeal, like the statistic you just shared about how there is a large over-incarceration, mass incarceration of Black and brown individuals who live in that area as compared to their representation of the communities is a really stark reality. But the surefire way to get, you know, no matter how well-meaning people, you know, are say they are, to get white people, you know, scared and voting against someone is to claim that the Black or the brown person is like supporting terrorists or criminals, right? I mean, we see this happening in several races across the country right now. We have, you know, candidates who are not doing that tough on crime shtick, because we know over the past several decades that tough on crime has been code for locking up and over prosecuting Black and brown communities, right? So when we're looking at what's happening, so I mean, her campaign is trying to do what campaigns are supposed to do, knocking on all the doors, talking to people, but also like going through a mass education of why these policies that she's trying to adopt are necessary. I mean, when we're looking at, you know, communities that have been ravaged not only by the crack epidemic and drugs in general, but then also now we've seen this more recent newer wave of the opioid epidemic as the county as a whole. Mm-hmm. Like, that was one of the things I appreciated, like, about the way Wesley Bell ran his campaign, was leveraging how, you know, we have these tools and resources that we can use in terms of drug courts and things of that nature, in terms of helping people who really need treatment of one form or another, and not necessarily incarceration. And so Rachel's looking at something very similar when she's talking about Boston, and it's actually improving the quality of life for all of those who reside in the county. There are some other issues coming out of, you know, the incumbent, because this was actually a race actually that was an open seat because the incumbent was not running for re-election. But there were some findings, some court cases, I think it was from like a couple of years ago, about like a tainted lab with DNA. I mean, there were all sorts of issues with prosecuting cases in this county that disproportionately affected Black and brown people. So Rachel's really looking at how to have a more equitable and, you know, equitable and justice-seeking office that is balancing the needs of, you know, the relatives and victims, but also making sure that the accused are getting a fair shake in the system, as fair a shake as possible in this system, considering all the constraints that exist. And I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of these progressive-minded DA candidates that are starting to run. And people are really building up the base with the community and trying to organize in a way that's really different. One thing that I thought was very interesting that the candidates in the Dem primary did, and Rachael got the endorsement from these groups, there were groups that organized debates or forums with the DA candidates with incarcerated persons. Incarcerated persons got to ask questions of these people, like when they were running in a debate, and like Rachael performed the best. Now, some might say, well, of course they want someone who will answer their questions well, but when you consider that she's actually grappling with the realities and the conditions that are making our prisons overflow with people, it's not that, oh, these are criminals trying to pick the person who's prosecuting them. I mean, nobody ever says that about the police, right? The police are literally backing DAs all across the country because they will do what they want them to do. But we have someone who's really like looking at how do I best serve the population as a whole, and that requires listening to different segments of people. So you have people who are who are locked up because of cash bail, because they literally can't afford the bail, or because it's a crime of poverty or something of that nature, and you're listening and really taking into consideration all these different conflicting issues, and then trying to make policy on that basis. You see someone like a Rachael Rollins, like a Larry Krasner, like a Wesley Bell, who are trying to move justice forward in a real meaningful way that doesn't have the same gridlock as a state legislator. Like a district attorney, a county prosecutor, these races, we also have Mark Hayes running in Hennepin County, Minnesota. these individuals literally can make decisions with the stroke of a pen that, you know, our state legislatures would be locked in gridlock over trying to figure out.
That leads to two very quick questions here I want to get to before we end. One has to do with the progressive candidates running for DA, which is actually a relatively new phenomenon in American politics, to have people with this mindset that wants to see the ending cash bail, not arresting people for drug use in the community, and these small misdemeanors, urinating in alleys, whatever it is, not putting people in jail, and trying to find different ways to adjudicate issues other than prison. But that also means that it sets them up on a direct collision course with law enforcement in those communities where they are the district attorney, if they win these races. So, and we see that we're broadcasting from Baltimore. Marilyn Mosby won. She's in a constant conflict with the police, saying she's not tough enough and she's not doing, and even though she won the last primary. And so the question is, what do you think this is setting up in terms of a broader political movement in this country when you have races like this taking off?
Yeah. Like, I think in some ways it's setting up maybe one, a real requirement of independence and autonomy in these seats that we haven't really seen, because like you noted, I mean, they work really closely with police, but when you have police officers, as what happened in some of the races out in California in the primaries, or they didn't have primaries, these were like, it was just a one and done race. So, you know, you had Genevieve who ran out in San Diego County. When you have people who are funded by police officers and police unions because they want that person in, even though they have this horrible record, it really serves as a stark contrast to what does it mean to uphold and pursue justice. And I really think when we look at, you know, the proliferation of, you know, Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, as well as the Movement for Black Lives and other organizing work that's happened over the last several years, a real, you know, we can agitate from the outside all we want to, but until we actually can get people in these direct decision-making positions, like, it's a both and, right? It's not that agitating from the outside didn't work, so we go elect people. You do both, because we still need to hold folks accountable once they're elected to office. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see more of this people, you know, building and organizing with communities to run, and communities having more leverage or understanding of how to hold folks accountable. And I think police officers that are really about their job, since their basic job is allegedly serving, protecting, they should be on board with this, because ultimately they just want the communities to be safe. But we also know there's other issues and funding and machinations that go on with that too. So I think that's like where we're going, where we see like the movement that sprung up around Larry Krasner, the movement that ultimately led to Kim Foxx being elected in Chicago. And it'll be interesting to see how that even plays into the mayoral elections happening in February in Chicago. But also, what we've seen happen in Ferguson, groups like, you know, Color Change and, you know, Sean King's Real Justice PAC. You know, I work with Democracy for America, and we've begun endorsing DA candidates and things like that since we endorse up and down the ballot too. And there really is a real motivation. There's actually even a group that is working with people to run for sheriff, to try and draft more progressive-minded sheriffs, because people are really looking at these decision-making, you know,
on the local level.
At the local level, because we've seceded too much ground for too long to Republicans and conservatives by just writing off positions. So people are really looking at the change that we need to make. And these are like really immediate, impactful ways we can do something without worrying about struggling at the federal level with Congress, or, you know, here at the state level with your state legislature. Like, these are immediate decision makers. So
very quickly here, because we're almost out of time, but there's another major issue in these races, and in her race specifically, Rachael Rollins' race and Genevieve Jones-Wright, in other words, around the country, which is this rise in black candidates running as progressives, many of them women, and running in races in not predominantly black communities. This is another sea change that I find really interesting to watch, and seeing how it's bubbling up and actually taking hold, and folks like Rachael Rollins and Genevieve Jones-Wright and Stacey Abrams running for governor in your home state of Georgia could actually win. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, the big thing with Genevieve Jones-Wright, she's an amazing candidate, got to meet her in June, but the big thing with her race was, like I was talking about, was, you know, having like all this police, you know, backed money that flew into their race to handpick the DA. And had they had a little bit more time, a little bit more organizing, and I'm pretty sure whatever she does next is going to be phenomenal, and she's going to like win and do all the things.
But we're seeing the same thing, like you're saying. I think what it is we have this, particularly after Black women for so long have been at the vanguard of all these different movement spaces, and we just watched this nation, regardless of what people think about how the election went down, elect Donald Trump, right? The most unqualified of unqualified people. And oftentimes, candidates of color in particular, and younger candidates have had this experience too. They get told like, oh, it's not your turn, or you're not electable for these reasons, or people will never vote for you. People just voted for that. So clearly, if you give people something to vote for, voters can't be that picky if they actually elected Trump, right? So what I'm really excited about seeing, and this, when I think about my own daughter and other young women that I know, they are being, they're just like, it doesn't matter what other people are saying. It's possible for us. We're not letting other people set our boundaries for us anymore. So you have this huge, also in Boston, in that same area, Ayanna Pressley, right? Who was basically told that she needed to just sit down and not run for Congress. And she won her primary. So we're seeing, these women stand up, predominantly women, not all, but we're seeing people stand up and say, you know what? I'm going to do this because I have good ideas, and I'm going to do it for the block and for the people, and we're going to move this forward because this is what's necessary in this time. It's not anymore of the hand-wringing trying to get the Romney Republicans to come, caucus with us so we can, overturn Trump. It's like really building with communities, and I really appreciate what Stacey Abrams is doing here in Georgia, despite all the dumbness from the Republicans, as well as what other candidates are doing across the country to engage voters who have really actually been left behind by both parties and the system itself.
We're sitting here talking with Anoa Changa, who is host of The Way with Anoa. It's always a pleasure to talk with her because she's got such a grasp on these issues, and I'm always enjoying our conversations. And we're here on the Real News Network. And if you say stay tuned for just a minute, I'm going to come right back with Anoa just to talk for 5 minutes and less about get an update on the Georgia election, which we meant to do today. So, Anoa, good to have you with us, but don't go away. And I'm Mark Steiner here with the Real News Network. Stay with us. We're coming right back.